You don't need any more tanks on the road or to take over the national television channel to carry out a coup. Your democracy dies slowly, quietly, in the way that is dying out in India.
Welcome to Global Power Shifts. Special thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm Jim Stenman in Dubai, and my lovely co-host Suzanne Kiampur is with us back again. As you all know, GPS is about a new multipolar world, power moving beyond any single center, and we bring on people that explain those shifts to us from the inside. Few countries embody that shift like India. It's the world's most populous country. It's also hosting BRICS this year, courted by Washington, Moscow, and the Gulf all at once, and locked in a tense standoff with Pakistan. It's also rising economic power that many argue hasn't yet delivered on its full potential, even as its diaspora shapes the world well beyond its borders, leading some of Silicon Valley's biggest companies, and even producing a British Prime Minister. But to truly understand India today and where it's going, you have to go back to when it was born. Today's guest has spent over 30 years, I believe, reporting on the country from the inside. Josy Joseph is one of India's best-known investigative journalists, a chronicler of its security state, and founder of Confluence Media, whose Netflix series Black Warrant reached a global audience. His new book, Birth of a Nation, draws on newly declassified archives to retell the final weeks before independence and argues that the Indian Pakistan that we know today was never inevitable. Josy, welcome to Global Power Shifts.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Suzanne.
Great having you with us. So as we mentioned there, in 1947, the UK, the British Empire, withdrew and obviously left India and Pakistan divided, turning them into two different countries, and that was a birth that did not happen without a lot of violence. Your work suggests that it left a profound mark that never really healed. So as we're setting up this conversation today, can you just give us a sense of what that founding of India has done to the country today, and how it was done, and what it left behind that sort of shapes the most populous country in the world at the moment?
Jim, when people talk about Indian independence, primarily two things come to their mind in the larger public imagination. One is the partition, the bloody partition which created India and Pakistan and now Bangladesh, the three countries. And the second is the birth of India's largest democracy. But there is a very third interesting aspect which brought India to very close to balkanization, which is that it was also the largest surrender of hereditary power ever in history. 565 ruling families and their dependees gave up or surrendered power over a matter of few months. So my book is focusing on that aspect largely to see how did such a large-scale surrender of princely rulers come about. And these are not ordinary rulers. If you look at Nizam of Hyderabad, he was the richest person in the world according to Time magazine. So if you look at Tokyo Bay surrender of Second World War signing, you will see HMS Nizam the ship is standing just behind in the frame. So he is the one who gives ships to the British Empire and money to empires and his soldiers. Baroda built his palace, which is 3 times bigger than Buckingham Palace. So we are talking really rich, powerful rulers who had militaries which had just come back from Second World War, and with money and influence and supporters around the world. So my book is focused on what happened was in the summer 1947, Lord Mountbatten, who is coming out of Second World War as a hero, is appointed to India to hand back power to Indians. And he lands in India in the summer and then begins this very complex process which ends up in the partition and also ends up in hundreds of these rulers being forced to nicely or otherwise give up power. So I went looking for what really happened, because in June of 1947, when Mountbatten agreed for the first time to set up a department under Indians to deal with the princely rulers. Since then, the documentations, the archives shifted to Indian hands, because until then it's British, and as you know, the British have a great way of bookkeeping and document keeping and preserving papers, whereas India is chaotic. So I was looking for those papers, and that's my book is coming out from there. But it's also the story of, in a larger sense, I wrote it with a sense of urgency, a sense of uh, here and now danger, a realization of the danger that republics and democracies are very difficult to create, and we tend to forget how difficult it was to create those nation states, and because we forget to repeatedly tell ourselves and coming generations about the struggle to create imperfect though but democracies and republics that we have today, because we forget to celebrate them, what happens, it's so easy to lose. So my book was in many ways, I was hoping to make this an accessible story for the larger masses while being honest and uh, academically rigorous.
Josy, you've spent 30 years digging into your country's past and its power structures, but I'm curious, how has the understanding of India's history shaped you personally and as a journalist? Was there anything in particular that kind of inspired you to go down this route?
So, and I come from a village, a very scenic village, but I was born into a very lower middle class, almost poor family that was struggling to make both ends meet. I went to a local government school and got educated, my primary education, my mother tongue, Malayalam. By the age of 11, because my father was quite obsessed with getting us good education, I became the lucky guy among the four siblings to end up getting admission through a very tough entrance examination into a public school that is shaped after Eton, the British Eton school, public school. These are the military public schools in India, and that began to change my life. So all through my life, it is the state and its institutions, its compassion towards its children, its scholarships, its colleges that gave me education, helped me come up here. So that is how the past and the state shaped me in a personal way. So otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here and talking to you. It would be somebody else who is an aristocrat from royal family who would be speaking to you. So in many parts of the world, around in many countries, as you both know very well, because you have been closely watching this entire game of global shifting powers, I'm sure you must have come across hundreds, if not thousands, of men and women like me who come from nowhere uh, with almost no name and no reason to be appreciated, but with some good education and the freedom that the society has offered them to critique, to report, to stand up to the powers. And so, Susan, yeah, everything that I do is shaped and influenced by the fact that I'm born and I was born in India, imperfect it is, and I'm very proud of its democracy, imperfect it is. It's also because it's the greatest human experiment ever since the out of Africa began by the modern human beings, because nowhere in history has so many diverse people come together without much bloodshed to live together under a written constitution peacefully.
Let's go back to those final weeks in 1947. For most people outside of India, independence is three names: Gandhi, Nehru, and Mountbatten. And it was a map drawn in a hurry. I think you would agree. What did the declassified files change about that story?
Gandhi, Nehru, Mountbatten, Jinnah, Patel, they all remain the big giant shadows. Nothing changes about them. But what changes is the realization that it's a small men and women, little known, almost forgotten. They're the real heroes who create a republic. So you have a spy in the cabinet of Nizam of Hyderabad, the world's richest guy, one of the most powerful rulers in the world, who is sending telegram on a daily basis through a friend in a very circuitous way, if I may call him a great spy, who alerts New Delhi about every move by Nizam to secure his independence. It's it's a it's a it's a it's a it's a man who burned down as a child his village school, because he was angry with the school teacher, became a miner in a gold mine, ends up in Mumbai, then Bombay, to sell clothes, cheap clothes on the street, becomes a typist with the British Empire, and rise up to become the most influential officer in British Empire, Indian official, who shapes the idea of India-Pakistan, shapes idea of Indian democracy. So I think what is unknown or what is less celebrated is these little-known heroes who also stood up to the powerful princely states, who also were able to stitching it together. And I think the big takeaway, if you ask me, is that great democracies like around the world, republics or countries, they emerge and they survive because of the little women and men who we often don't even remember and who continue the struggle on a daily basis.
When the British left, were they negotiating in good faith, in your view, or simply not listening to the people whose countries they were creating and dividing at the same time?
There are three aspects to Jim, your question. Number one is that there was clearly two large factions within the British Empire. One where the people like Lord Mountbatten and Clement Attlee, the Labour, they realized that time is up. We need to leave India. And for example, when Mountbatten lands in Delhi within weeks, he writes back to London saying that there's a great sense of hurry here. We have to move fast and leave. On the other side, you have Churchill, to many others who were greatly romantic about the empire and the great service they did to the humanity around the world, despite the colonial crimes that were committed, etc. But they were active, and so you can see a section of British politicians and aristocrats who are very actively supporting dissidents, supporting the princely states. And in fact, there is one politician, Kendall. He's a member of parliament. He's also the business partner of one of India's big princely states called Nabanagar. So the ruler and Kendall have set up an automobile company in UK to build the first people's car. And he is, as British is planning to leave, he buys a decommissioned British naval vessel and is converting it into a yacht to smuggle 20 tons of gold for his friend to fight for his independence in India. So you find both kinds of Britishes there.
You take a more complicated view of Gandhi than I think the popular story allows, and there's a scene that I want to read. It's 1947, the deal is days away, and Mountbatten, the viceroy, needs to see Gandhi. Mountbatten met with Gandhi, who told the viceroy that he was observing his day of silence. Gandhi scribbled notes on the backs of 5 old envelopes and handed them to the viceroy. "I'm sorry I can't speak, but I know you do not want me to break my silence." The fate of 400 million people negotiated on the backs of 5 old envelopes. Who was Gandhi in those final weeks? Who was he?
It's a very interesting, Susan, aspect of Gandhi. The day that you're describing is a day when Mountbatten is revealing to Indian political leaders, including Gandhi, that the empire has decided to partition India and Pakistan. So in the morning, he meets with a group of political leaders, Nehru, Patel, Jinnah, etc. And after them comes Gandhi. Gandhi, as you know, was committed to a united India. He was dead against partition. So now he knows where 10 a.m. when he comes, he knows that it's the fate is sealed, his wishes won't come through. So he takes a very, the smartest political move, which is that today is my day of silence, unless it is very important. This partition is not as important to me. It's better that I be silent and preserve my dignity and go back. I'm defeated, but I won't admit it.
He held his boundaries.
Yeah, and you know what he scribbled on the postcards? No, nothing about the partition. He scribbled about his friend, who is called Frontier Gandhi in NWFP, about his Frontier Gandhi's complaints about the local British governor, and then he goes away. From a train that is going to Bihar, Gandhi then writes to Mountbatten saying that, you know that I'm dead against partition, and I'm sorry I had to see this. So, yeah, I mean, what better politics than that to accept defeat, to be silent in it?
14 months ago, India and Pakistan, they fought a 4-day war. I believe it was one of the most serious clashes that we've seen in decades. And there's a ceasefire now that seems to be holding, but barely so. Do you think the negotiators could have predicted that something like this would have happened decades on?
In fact, if you look at 47 and that initial few years after independence, there were many efforts and many hope that they will one day reunite, they will remain a loose federation, etc., etc. But I think one of the things that people forget, and we should keep in mind when we discuss India-Pakistan conflicts and standoff, is the fact that millions of people, not just directly affected but indirectly, were deeply affected and influenced by the bloody partition and its aftermath. Millions of people had to abandon their homes and move. Hundreds of thousands of, I think the conservative estimate is about 500,000 people were butchered. Thousands of women were raped. So all that happened, that mayhem has never really left India's psyche or Pakistan's psyche. So every time that you see a conflict, keep in mind that mayhem, that wound is being either naturally bursting again, or somebody is pushing it back into the mainstream. And
And Josy, just for some of our audience who may not be familiar with India's history, what was the main motivation by the British when it came to partition?
the motivation was simply that Muhammad Ali Jinnah had launched, and his supporters had launched Muslim League, and they kept demanding Pakistan. And in 1946, they launched very violent direct action day in Calcutta, and violence kept spreading, and they were adamant on Pakistan, and as a homeland of Muslims. Now, on the contrary, the Congress Party, led by Gandhi, Nehru, etc., they couldn't think of anything other than a secular country. So on the one side was a demand for a Hindu Muslim homeland. On the other side was a secular country. And Gandhi, in fact, did suggest making Jinnah the Prime Minister of a united India to avoid partition. But I think by then the wounds of hatred, the communal carnage, and the tensions that were in Punjab and spreading across Bengal, etc., had seeded in, and I think that is when the British decided, okay, that's the only way out. Let's partition.
And would it be fair to say that people largely lived in peace prior to colonization, or is that not the case at all across religious lines?
I think India generally has had a very peaceful, cohesive existence through history. India, and I'm talking India, the geographical India that we see today. Because, for example, I come from a Catholic family. I'm not a very devout Christian, but I come from a Catholic family which claims from south of India in Kerala, where we believe that, or our traditions and so-called history says that probably the Syrian Catholics in Kerala and South India are older than the European Catholics, because Saint Thomas came to India before Peter came to Rome. We definitely have one of the very old settlements of Jews in India. Islam came to India during the time of the Prophet in the south, while in the north it came as invaders. So India, because of its very geographical position and historic diversity, and the fact that we had Muslim rulers for many centuries, especially in North India, and South Indian rulers have gone abroad, invading Indonesia, to the southeast. We have always had a very mixed up, very complex but largely peaceful culture. And many of the rulers, especially if you look at the Mughal rulers, as they, after the first generation, obviously they are being born in India, and you will see many of them trying to be more secular, trying to be more accommodative, etc., with occasional chapters of tension and violence. But largely, India has had a peaceful existence as a multi-religious, multicultural, and multi-ethnic society. Don't forget the fact that it's a continental country where you can find almost every DNA that must have left and traveled around the world in some form or the other. So, yeah, India that way has been successful in many ways and peaceful, but partition really uh, was a real gnash on its chest, and it continues to bleed both nations and our own societies, because it is not just with Pakistan that we have tension. Uh, for example, India's present ruling party, Bharatiya Janata Party of Narendra Modi, for them, the dehumanizing of Muslim is now an active part of their agenda. Prime Minister is silent on those activities by his party members, and a certain section of BJP and the right wing seems to have weaponized and is quite humiliating towards Muslims and to some extent to Christians. But yeah, so the wounds are not just India, Pakistan, it's also deeply within India. I hope one day we are able to overcome that and India finds its rightful place among the peaceful nations.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, I think you're saying that there's peaceful existence now broadly in India, but how big of a threat is this sort of rise of, aggression towards the Muslim community within the country?
It's very severe, and Suzanne, it has got multiple aspects to it. We have one of the largest population of Muslims in the world. It is, if I'm, it must be around 200 million Muslims, probably second largest Muslim population after Indonesia, I think. I could be wrong, but it's somewhere around that. So this othering, the dehumanizing is visible at every level, even in normal day lives. For example, traditionally, Muslims were not recruited in large numbers in government, in private sector, organized jobs, etc. So historically, they have been carpenters, vehicle mechanics, etc. And if you see the gig economy, there again, Muslims have proportionately large number of representation, because what gig economy is doing is bringing the carpenters together, the housemates together, etc., etc. Platform economy. So one is that the continuing discrimination against the Muslims, the deprived classes, is increasing. Second, because these crimes against the people, against the humanity, against Muslims, etc., is not being actively followed or investigated by the police and tried in courts. The the trust in Indian police system and judiciary has weakened, along with its other factors in other areas. And as you know, when democracy weakens and parallelly the Modi government has been strong arming the mainstream media, silencing them. So as a result, what we have seen is the foreign investors have lost confidence in Narendra Modi's India. We are seeing them, the FDI dropping dramatically, and foreign institutional investors from stock market are pulling out at any moment. They fear somewhere else to go. So we have got caught up in a very situation where I think only the dishonest experts would say that Narendra Modi's governance and this majoritarian politics has had no impact on Indian economy. Indian economy is in crisis. The joblessness is at one of the highest since India, at least definitely in the last 40 years. The youth are unrest. The youth unrest is spreading. Youth are unrest because of various reasons, including organized crime and corruption in entrance examinations and university admissions. And there are no foreign investments. And even the local businessmen, the big entrepreneurs, are not investing in India. So if you see them, they're also taking their money out and investing abroad. So the Modi's the majoritarian governance has forced India into a corner economically, not just socially.
Can you explain what Hindu nationalism is for our audience who isn't as well versed in it?
After independence, or sometime before independence, in the early part of the 20th century, you see a strand of a movement begins to emerge in present-day Maharashtra near Mumbai, which is, I would call, the root, ideological base and root of the Hindu nationalism. It's called Hindutva. It's a political, it's like the political Islam. So it's a political Hindu, politicization of Hindus. Their arguments are stemming from, we are under siege, we are going to be attacked, or women won't be safe, we need to protect them against the Muslims. And that strand, which begins to gain strength, also is an apologist for the British Empire. They do not want to take part in the Quit India movement. They are very actively supporting British in various ways. And by the summer of 1947, which is one of the aspects of my book, is that the leading ideologue or the ideologues of one of the strands of Hindutva politics, which is called the Hindu Mahasabha, the Assembly of Hindus, is actively supporting Hindu rulers, princely rulers, to become independent, balkanize India. And then you see within months, Gandhi is assassinated by a group of them, by the Hindu. So, and then what you see is, for years, the Hindutva politics is a very small, minor component in Indian politics. But then by the 1980s, under this leadership of L.K. Advani, who himself is a victim of partition, the new form of the new, under the new name, which is BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, Indian People's Party, takes shape, and it takes up the agenda of Ram Temple. They claim that in the city of Ayodhya in Uttar Pradesh, there was a mosque which was demolished by them. There was a mosque. They say that that mosque was built on Ram's birthplace by demolishing a temple. Ram is Lord Ram, the most revered figure of Hindus. Since then, on the back of that frenzy and whatever you have created, BJP has grown at an improbable pace to become India's most dominant political party. In nutshell, that is the Hindutva politics and the Hindu majoritarianism. But to the greatness of Hinduism, I should point out that even at the peak of his popularity, Narendra Modi gets only about 33% of total Indian votes. So he's only the leader of a minority, not the majority Indians.
Over to your Muslim neighbor, while India is rising, Pakistan is having a moment of its own. So it's brokered the ceasefire in the Iran war. It's hosted the only direct U.S.-Iran talks. And its army chief has been feted at the White House. So from Delhi, how does India read its rivals' kind of newfound role as the world's mediator? And is there a risk? Because during the war, there was an interesting kind of breakdown of weapons. So like Chinese and Turkish weapons on the Pakistani side, French and Israeli weapons on the Indian side. So like, is India and Pakistan kind of becoming a theater for bigger powers competing?
No, I don't think in the long run that's going to happen. But what's happening is the other aspect of Narendra Modi government is that Narendra Modi himself, in fact, his own mentor, L.K. Advani, has said that he's the greatest PR manager. So under Modi, foreign policy became very performative. Then Modi would go to America, hold a big meeting of diaspora Indians. He would want to talk about Obama as a friend and Trump as a friend. And it's all performative and a spectacle for him. And in the process, what has happened is, and also he doesn't realize the foolishness of getting cozy with Israel beyond a point, because not just because of the fact that India is home to a large number of Muslims, but also because Netanyahu is not the leader that you would want to be seen in a frame, at least in the recent memory. So he makes several tactical and strategic errors. He is also unable to deal with Trump's maverick presidency. He keeps avoiding Trump for a long time when he's and all that. So I think Indian foreign policy has lost its direction under Modi to a great extent, and that is one part of it. The second part of is, as a fallout of that, India has lost a lot of traditional allies and friends. So in a country like Iran would have actually historically turned to probably India, listen to India more than Pakistan.
Really? Why?
Oh, we have, so there it's the Persian relationship, the Iranian Indian relationship is very historic and very long. And if you look at the Shia, Islam, etc., India is a very historic home to a lot of great Shia traditions. And we share far too many things in common, including the Urdu language that is very common in India is part is in many ways sister language of Persian. So there has been very long historic cultural relationships. But because India has gone and packed itself with Israel, obviously it has lost a lot of credibility with Iran. And
Where
with,
did that come from, or where did that stem from?
historically, the Hindutva politicians, Hindutva movement has been big fans of Israel, and that fandom, that is a historic reason why right-wing governments in India have always been very close and accommodative of BJP. And we have come to a situation where Narendra Modi has just gone in and embraced Netanyahu for technology ranging from military to Pegasus snooping capabilities.
But
And what
what's the
else?
attraction?
I don't know. I think it is a historically Indian Hindutva seems to be very obsessed, very enamored by the creation of the Jewish state and the courage of it and all that. They've also been great fans of Hitler and Mussolini. I mean, it's very contradictory, but yeah, they've also been admirers of the Hitler and the fascists. So India is in a moment of crisis, but what Pakistan has achieved is nothing to do with Pakistan's strategic heft. It is to do with whatever Trump's. It just happened to be a moment of history where Trump and Iran seems to have agreed, reached out to Pakistan, and Munir uh, seems to be Trump seems to have a soft corner for the present Pakistan leadership. Also, because don't forget that Pakistanis are very actively encouraging or supporting Trump's foray into cryptocurrency, etc. So it's all opportunistic too. Uh, but what has happened? The larger context is India was a fast-rising economic power until about a decade ago, and the narrative around the world was becoming India-China. Some of them called it the Chindia moment, etc. And BRIC was one of the breakout models from there. But what has happened is because we reduced in the last decade the conversation down to Hindu, Muslim, so the Indo-Pak de-hyphenation has happened. Or sorry, re-hyphenation has happened. It was de-hyphenated for a long time. We have been re-hyphenated, and it is a trap that India has created for itself. I hope we can find, but India can only come out of it if its economy picks pace and India becomes that alternative to China as an economic power, not as a muscular right-wing or majoritarian power.
Is Pakistan outshining India right now?
It is in the context of Iran, maybe, and or in the context of Trump's transactional diplomacy, maybe, but that's not a matter of big concern. I think the bigger matter of concern for us would be that India was beautifully and perfectly placed to take advantage of the world's losing faith in China and the rise of Chinese authoritarianism, both economically and politically. We as a democracy, we as a liberal economic power, but we have, I mean, the government under Modi has very royally pulped that opportunity, and we have completely lost out and missed out on the new wave of. See, for the last 40 years of economic liberalization, India quickly caught up with the technological transformation. What Jim was talking about, how many of the Silicon Valley companies are led by Indians, is the byproduct of that.
It's interesting you mentioning the diaspora. I mean, obviously, I live in Dubai at the moment. I've spent a lot of time in the UK living there, and in the US as well. And it just strikes me, and I have these conversations with Suzanne as well, that it seems like you have the world's most accomplished diaspora in many ways, from, very senior roles in Silicon Valley to even 10 Downing Street. Is there a part of you that wishes that some of these members of your diaspora who are highly accomplished would come back to India and ultimately make India great again?
No, I don't have that kind of. I'm not enamored by that. I mean, those people who are in the right place at the right opportunities, they were able to make it big. We have enough people here in India who are very smart, accomplished, who are much brighter, who can make this country great, but they are not getting the opportunities. The attack on meritocracy in this country is unbelievable because of this. When the authoritarianism rises, merit is the first thing that takes a backseat, and that's what's happened in this country. The loudest right-wing fanatics are getting vocal and get more ears than the saner, intelligent people. But just to add to the diaspora conversation, it is not just about Silicon Valley or Dubai alone, Jim. Don't forget that
Mm-hmm.
Indian diaspora is spread across over 120 countries,
Mm-hmm.
from the sugarcane fields of Caribbeans to the tea plantations in Malaysia to to Fiji, to you name the country. Indian diaspora was there either as intended laborers or as simple migrants or as tech brains or doctors or nurses, but they've contributed to the world's transformation in a positive way, even at the cost of their own lives and their own families. So everywhere I go in the world, I may come across an Indian or somebody of Indian diaspora who has an amazing story to tell about this great great grandfather who came from an unknown village as an indented laborer as a child, etc. And that globalization is not just part of Indian story, it's part of your story, Jim, it's part of Susan, your story. We are all part of that. So I think that's how humanity is. But this entire wave around the world on the migrants against migration is probably the most foolish of the political movements that we are seeing against human progress, because when you bid goodbye to the last aircraft leaving with the last migrants from America, America will be a poor little country, not a rich economic power.
I guess my question is the diaspora being deployed in the right way? Because in some ways, the Indian diaspora, they're your greatest diplomats.
No, they're not. I think what happened was that diaspora is very powerful, extremely powerful, and as you know, Indian immigrants have the highest per capita in the US, if I'm not wrong. But all of that said, I think India has not been able to leverage the Indian diaspora in a positive way. What has happened is that since the rise of the Modi government and the Hindutva right-wing forces, there is a certain kind of rowdiness and loudness and intemperate behavior that is rising and very visible among the Indians. And if you see the pushback against that, you can see from Vietnam to Bangkok to Australia, you will see a lot of anti-Indian sentiments, which is quite unfortunate because that's a minority of Indians. Majority of Indians are law-abiding, hardworking, good people. But when, again, the story is the same all through history, when the authoritarians rise, making you fear about the unknown enemy, you end up being loud and brash and aggressive and playing victimhood.
Speaking of fear, you've spent decades reporting on the machinery behind India's security state. So obviously, this is the world's largest democracy, and police, intelligence agencies, and financial investigators are becoming political weapons and have been so now for quite a while. And they're used to intimidate critics and settle scores. And people outside India might find that difficult to square off with this other image of India as the world's largest democracy. So just make that connection for us and explain what's happening and what you've seen yourself through your work.
See, over the years, what we have seen is the state is always intolerant towards independent investigative journalism all around the world. But you also draw certain moral lines on the ground, not necessarily legal lines, and that's how societies exist and manage themselves. So, in the past, let's say before Modi came to power, if I were to, whenever I did an investigation against the government, yes, there were pushbacks, there would be threats, there would be efforts at intimidation, but they were, I would call it the retail level. Right now, what we are seeing is ever since Modi came to power is wholesale, unabashed intimidation of any critic, not just media, but civil society, etc. So they're going after civil society and is almost being completely destroyed. So India is now has one of the weakest civil societies. They have unleashed economic agencies, the investigation agencies, against their critics, against corporate houses, and against anyone that they are uncomfortable about. And these stormtroopers, these, my estimate is about 4 million non-military staff of the intelligence investigative agencies are available to the politicians in power today, to the Modi government, to intimidate their rivals, jail their rivals, to threaten corporates, to silence mainstream media, and to even intimidate the judiciary. And that's what is happening in India. And this template of using the non-military arms is actually already academically argued and proven, but you don't need any more tanks on the road or to take over the national television channel to carry out a coup. Your democracy dies slowly, quietly, in the way that is dying out in India.
So a free press is a pillar of any democracy, and both you and I sounds like have had experiences with the Indian government around freedom of press. Yours much more difficult than mine. They just rejected my visa several times, and then I finally got in. But India's press was one of the most independent in Asia, and much of it now sits under government control. And you know this cost personally when an airline and its billionaire founder sued you for well over $100 million on your first book. So how did the media actually get captured? Like, what is the root of this? How did this begin? And is there cause for optimism? Is it getting better or worse, basically?
Yeah, so 2-3 things are happening. One is, Susan, you are not the only journalist who has been refused visa by the government. It is almost more the norm now to reject visa to journalists, foreign journalists. And it's very embarrassing.
But what are they so afraid of?
They're afraid of themselves. They're afraid of their own crimes. They're afraid of their own misdeeds. So they're afraid of truth, you know?
I mean, I wouldn't have even been suspicious until they rejected me over and over again, which then made me start looking into them.
So you know,
it's just backfired.
You know them. So that is who they are. They're afraid of truth. They're afraid of their own shadows. Two great things are happening. No, two things are happening. One is great, one is not great. The not so great part is that most of the Indian mainstream media are owned by families or corporate houses, so who have skeletons in their cupboard or have businesses to do with the government. So it is very easy to bully them into silence or to become the propagandist arm for the government. And that's what has happened in India, which has happened in around the world in many parts. But the great thing happening in India is that while many of us were pushed out and left mainstream media, independent journalism has not died out in India. It is actually flourishing. It is flourishing so much that I call it the golden era of investigative journalism in India. For the first time, Indian journalists breached the secrecy of Mauritius and showed how Adani Group, which is close to Modi, which is the most powerful crony capitalist ever in Indian history, they proved how he and his cronies have been manipulating the stock market, forced stock market to at least acknowledge, but made it a part of the public court. Despite the Adani Group filing at least 17 cases on dozens and dozens of journalists around the country, including criminal cases, criminal defamation, all kinds of rubbish, the independent media is not giving it. And that should frighten, and that is our optimism. That is the hope that we should carry. because I'm not at all alone in this fight against corrupt corporates or governments. There is a generation or there's a wave of people standing up, and look at the independent media of India. Scratchy, few $100,000 in revenue, but they're standing up, fighting the big corporates and the big politicians. They're going after Modi and his power. They are playing that adversarial role that all of us are proud of as journalists. So it's a golden era. Only thing is the mainstream media is not there. They have become the lapdogs of the regime. But there are the barking dogs and the biting dogs, and they will not give up. And that's a great optimism that India has.
Josy, as we begin to wrap up, how does post-colonial India in 2026 become the power that so many Indians throughout history have wanted it to become?
So one of the great things that happened was India's freedom movement leaders, Gandhi, Nehru, etc., they also were very clear-eyed about what India should become, that it should be a secular democratic republic. In fact, Nehru, when he moved his first resolution in the Constituent Assembly, he did not even use the word democratic, but he said India will be nothing but a republic. That's first part. I'm talking about the foundation, the strong foundations that they laid out. Second, they built great education institutions, great medical colleges, medical schools. They unleashed several rounds of food revolutions, milk revolution, etc., and pulled millions of people out of poverty and illiteracy. So India was on a rapid. I don't know how many societies in the world, democratic societies in the world, would have pulled so many million people out of poverty, grew at such a pace, and educated out generations of people who would go on to Silicon Valley and other places and become leaders. I don't think any other society would have that story. And that is the power that you see in the larger global wrap-up about India, that the world's largest democracy, fastest growing economy, etc., etc. But while we were growing and emerging at such pace, over the last half a century, Indian democracy was slowly decaying. And in 1975, the Congress party under Indira Gandhi, Congress is now in the opposition, it declared internal emergency and for the first time suspended democracy. And that decay which set in there slowly kept, biting into and chiseling away. And that is why today we are talking about democracy in crisis when we have detailed conversation. And when we do that one-line summary, we talk about India, the great democracy and the super and great economy. So if you see from far off, from the bird's eye view, if you see the largest democracy, which is a great rising economic power, probably could balance China and would be a great balancing power for the world itself, then the credit goes to those rough men, the great, the geniuses who were India's freedom fathers and freedom fighters and who built the country. If you, like me, sit inside this country and see the decay and is appalled and angry about it, then the blame will go to the recent generation of politicians who were obsessed with power, had no care about the morality of a republic or the legal realities of a republic. So we can take the argument either ways, Jim, but either ways, one thing that I should tell you is that I think India, because of its complexity and diversity, it's a society that has no option but to survive as a peaceful, democratic society.
Josy, it's been great having you on and learning more about not just India's history, but where the country is going, and we obviously hope for the best in terms of the future. These things tend to swing from left to right, and then they come back around in the end. So it's been great having you with us. We also want to encourage our viewers to follow Global Power Shift on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Instagram as well. And we will see you again next time. Take care.
Thank you.